T-Mobile just had a data breach exposing the personal information of 37 million users. Verizon recently had a data breach affecting a ton of people. It doesn't seem like it's going to stop. And the way to protect your data is by using a VPN, which hides your IP address, essentially anonymizing your data and protecting you from these breaches. The only VPN I trust is Private Internet Access, which is the only VPN that has legally demonstrated they don't log your activity. You'll get 83% off. That's just $203 a month plus 4 extra months free at piavpn.com/DavidP. Welcome to the show, everybody. A sort of red alert moment. Dozens and dozens of you emailing me over the last 48 hours saying, David, you have to talk about the election offices around the country that are increasingly filled with pro-Trump election deniers who, if given the opportunity to mess with the election in November, will do so. And could this explain Trump's confidence despite cratering polls, as well as his recent comment that you're not going to need to vote again as long as you vote for me this time? Rachel Maddow on MSNBC covering this. Exclusive reporting from Rolling Stone finds that there are dozens of swing state election officials who are pro-Trump election deniers. Now, understand that we are talking not like the Secretary of State of Georgia necessarily. We're talking about when you look at the thousands of local election officials at the county, precinct, etc. level, municipality in some cases. These are the individuals who will be tasked with certifying election results in their respective jurisdictions. Typically, these are counties. And if you look, as the Rolling Stone report explains in great detail, and we'll link to the story, if you look at swing states, critical battleground states like Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, yes, although less likely to be a battleground state, although maybe not, we'll look at new polling, Pennsylvania. Rolling Stone has identified, working with its partners, at least 70 pro-Trump election conspiracists who believe that Trump really won 2020, or who believe that it should have been sent back or rejected or whatever. They are currently working as county election officials. They've questioned the validity of elections. They've delayed or refused to certify results at some point in the last nearly 4 years. At least 22 of the 70 straight up refused certifications of elections in recent years. There's a quote from Democratic election lawyer Mark Elias, who we're going to try to get on the program to talk about this and discuss exactly what's going on and what can be done. He says, quote, I think we are going to see mass refusals to certify the election. Everything we are seeing about this election is that the other side is more organized, more ruthless, and more prepared. So the immediate and obvious question to those who call it quaint, called me old-fashioned, my friends. I think the candidate that wins the election should get to be the president of the United States. I know it's a crazy notion, apparently, in 2024. So there are two ways to answer the question, what can we do? On the one hand, we will and we should do everything possible to prevent these people from pulling it off. It also is the case, it might be that the only way to stop these people is to vote in numbers so massive that any attempt to overturn these results will be meaningless. And what I mean by that is that sometimes the only way to ensure that this doesn't become an election-denying conspiratorial mess, and I don't mean conspiratorial in fake conspiracy theories, I mean that they are able to conspire to steal the election the way they tried to do in 2020. The only way we might be able to do it is by showing up with everyone voting in numbers so overwhelming that messing around at the margins with some counties is simply not going to be enough. Now, that's not super auspicious as an explanation of what to do. We would be far better served if we had an absence of these hardcore pro-Trump MAGA election denying lunatics in positions of power in counties. But on the other hand, I don't want to dismiss the importance of 70 counties that we know of. There may be more, right? Some of these individuals may be quieter and we just don't know their views and they're in positions of power in certain counties. But at the end of the day, 70 counties, if they were exactly the right counties, could they flip a state? Yes, it's possible. It's possible. We have to hope that concurrent with doing everything that can be done legally to restrict the ability of these individuals to flip results unfairly, if we just overwhelm the vote in record numbers, it probably won't even be able to make a difference because those counties won't be enough to flip the results. Now, neither of these is very satisfying, right? Because as I say, on the one hand, we need to try to prevent these people from being in this position in the first place. How do we do it? I don't know. And that's why hopefully we'll speak to Attorney Mark Elias and he will tell us. But it's not super satisfying for me to say, let's try to get them out of power. What? How? What do we do? I'm not sure. On the other hand, it's also not super satisfying or optimistic to say, well, they'll probably be able to end up in a position to try to get away with it. But what we could do is just like vote in huge numbers, because every time we say, every single election we say, if we only had record turnout, none of this stuff would matter. And we don't always have record turnout. So I understand that neither side of this is particularly optimistic. They are the options we have. Overwhelm the vote and also do everything we can legally to limit the power of these individuals to try to steal counties. But that's what's going on. Rolling Stone is reporting on it. Rachel Maddow is talking about it. We have to keep talking about it, and we'll try to get Mark Elias on the show. Speaking of things going wrong for Trump, Donald Trump's lead is gone. It's gone in 7 key swing states, either losing to Kamala Harris or has lost a lead he had, and we are now within the margin of error. Let's talk about it. The Hill reports Harris pulls even with Trump among swing state voters. My, oh my, how quickly these elections can turn. Vice President Harris, this is per The Hill, has erased former President Trump's lead in 7 key battleground states, roughly a week after becoming the likely Democratic nominee. A Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll showed Harris and Trump in a tight race in all battleground states, with 48% backing Harris and 47% saying that they support Trump. Now, on average, we are talking about that 1.7 percentage point lead for Trump. We spelled that number out yesterday, and it remains that way. But the breakdown is very, very interesting, and this is where we have seen the shift. Tuesday's poll shows Harris opening an 11-point lead on Trump in Michigan. That's huge because that was like 20,000 vote margin or something like that in 2020. A 2-point lead in Nevada, a 2-point lead in Arizona, a 2-point lead in Wisconsin. Now, meanwhile, in these polls, Trump leads by 4 in Pennsylvania, 2 in North Carolina. We're not even counting on North Carolina. Pennsylvania would be nice, but it's not actually completely necessary. And the candidates are tied in Georgia at 47%. This is not a good sign for Donald Trump, and it is definitely a better feeling now compared to the start of July. I still think we need an additional full week to let all of the polling settle and get better and more representative data. But I also want to anecdotally show you some of the latest polls on Real Clear Politics just as snapshots. In a general election poll that just came out this morning, it is Kamala Harris +2 over Trump. This includes Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I am thrilled to see that Kennedy is down to just 3. You may recall that at one point in some polls, RFK Jr. was polling as high as 16 or even 18, which could be a total disaster for the Democratic nominee. At this point in time, whoever it is that RFK takes from, it's increasingly irrelevant as his national polling is down to 3. And I would bet in the states that will be close, it will be even lower than that. Jill Stein and Cornel West, fortunately, polling 0. Now, why do I say fortunately? For 2 reasons. I don't think they're good candidates, and any support that Stein and West have disproportionately would come from those otherwise likely to vote for Kamala Harris. They could ruin this entire thing and put Trump back in power. That's a great poll for Kamala. Couple other anecdotes. New Hampshire, Kamala +4, and New Hampshire in a multi-way race, Kamala +7. That's great to see. I mentioned already the Bloomberg poll in Arizona, where it's Harris +2, tied in Georgia, Harris +11 in Michigan, Harris +11 in Nevada, Trump still leading in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. We also have a whole bunch of other polling that is more of a mixed bag, but as we go back further and further, we do start to get to polling that does not fully account for this change in who is at the top of the Democratic ticket. And then finally, if you look at a different poll, The Hill reports Harris takes a 4-point lead in Pennsylvania. This is just a reminder that just because Trump is leading Pennsylvania in the Bloomberg poll doesn't mean that he has the lead in every poll. So a couple different things I think are important to think about. As we approach the 2024 election here in November, there are cracks in the Republican Party. When they are all of a sudden not running against an incredibly weak and unpopular candidate in Joe Biden, immediately the numbers start to crater. J.D. Vance, and we'll talk about this with Tim Miller upcoming, J.D. Vance is making boneheaded comment after comment, alienating growing numbers of critical voter demographics. There are Reagan Republicans saying, we're not going to support Trump. This is just absolutely ridiculous. The populists and the authoritarians and the evangelicals, they are going to stick with Trump until the very last moment. But the infighting, worst case scenario, it doesn't do anything. Best case, the infighting actually makes a bunch of them stay home, which I would completely welcome. And if Donald Trump does lose, it will then be a situation where the more standard swaths of the Republican Party, the capitalists, the pro-business libertarians, the military industrialists, they will likely, I believe, say it's over with this MAGA stuff. That's it. And maybe this will be the inflection point that we've suspected that it might be. Now, if you look historically, there is this pendulum that swings in the United States between left and right phases. The difference, or what we might be able to navigate here, is some kind of guardrail that was totally overpassed in 2016 when Trump became president, and to some degree, even since he was no longer president, just by the rhetoric and what he's gotten away with. What we might be able to do by defeating Trump in November, if we are able to do it, is not change that the pendulum does swing, but move the guardrails, or the Overton window, we might call it, so that when the pendulum does swing back to the right, it's not lunatic MAGA Trumpism. It's something comparatively more benign. Not something I would vote for, but still something more benign. Romney-type conservatism. The late John McCain type conservatism. Not stuff that I go, I love it, but stuff that doesn't make me say, is the next election at risk? Are the Democratic guardrails at risk? So this is early polling still. It's going in the right direction. It depends on us voting. MAGA World sees it. They are panicking, and we'll talk about that after the break. There was recently a huge data breach at T-Mobile. 37 million customers' personal data was exposed, and the data stays online forever and for anyone to access. And the number of data breaches in the U.S. is increasing by about 80%. It is not getting any better. That's why it is so important to use a VPN anytime you connect to the internet, changes your IP address, makes you anonymous. The only VPN I trust is private internet access. The only major VPN that is demonstrated in legal cases, they do not possess your internet activity, and the software is open source for the world to verify. When a company like T-Mobile or Verizon gets hacked, and you were using a VPN, your data still gets leaked, but it's associated with a fake IP address, essentially, not linkable to you. Private internet access is optimized for streaming and file sharing without the lag and buffering you get with other VPNs. And one of my favorite things about a VPN is being able to access streaming content not normally available in my country, like UK Netflix. Get private internet access for 83% off. That's just $203 a month plus 4 extra months for free. Go to piavpn.com/DavidP. The link is in the description. The David Pakman Show depends directly on your support. If you're hearing this message, you're not getting the full David Pakman Show experience. I encourage you to sign up at joinpakman.com. And quite frankly, the reason that we can do the show and give it away to everybody on every platform is that a tiny little percentage of our audience, we estimate 0.5%, directly subscribe to membership. And that is our primary revenue source, and it's how we do what we do. If we could get our support from 0.5% to 1%, that alone would make us financially sustainable indefinitely, regardless of what happens with other revenue sources like YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, the vagaries of which have often reduced revenue by 98% in some cases. And so that's the real critical reason why being supported directly by members is so important. So I invite you to sign up at joinpakman.com. You can read about the great member benefits. And if you'd like to request a free subscription, you can go to davidpakman.com/free membership. Do not email me about it. Just fill out the form at davidpakman.com/free membership. We know 3 of the 4 presidential and vice presidential candidates for November, and all 3 were out publicly yesterday. And you are going to now look at all 3 of them: Kamala Harris, J.D. Vance, and Donald Trump. We don't yet know who the 4th, Kamala Harris's VP, will be, but we will know by all reports by next Tuesday at the latest. They were all out. And I have to tell you, the vibe and the atmosphere at the Kamala Harris rallies is such a welcome change from MAGAism and Trumpism. Kamala Harris held a rally in Atlanta, Georgia yesterday, and it absolutely exploded. An electric atmosphere. Kamala Harris spoke directly to Donald Trump after learning that Trump is chickening out of debating her in the most pathetic way you can imagine. And she says, "Say it to my face," pushing back not only against the attacks on her levied by Trump, but also pointing out Trump's unwillingness to actually get on a debate stage with her and win the battle of ideas. This is much better than the Kamala Harris we saw some years ago out doing rallies and speeches. You love to see this.
So the momentum in this race is shifting. And there are signs that Donald Trump is feeling it. You may have noticed. So last week, you may have seen, he pulled out of the debate in September he had previously agreed to. So here's the thing. Here's the funny thing about that. So he won't debate, but he and his running mate sure seem to have a lot to say about me. And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird? Well, Donald, I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you've got something to say,
oh, man, this is very different than what we have seen. I mean, listen, it's different than what we've seen from Biden by far, the energy. And it's also very different than what we've seen from Trump. And I'm going to give you another example in a moment of a message that is just much more positive. This is absolutely the right thing to go after Trump this way. She's doing it with a smile. She's not using insults. She's doing it with a smile. And it's sending Trump into a tizzy. Trump doesn't know what to do. Now Trump is saying Kamala is old. He said that or implied it in an interview on Fox News last night, which we will look at. One more clip from this event. Kamala Harris wrapping up her speech on a rousing note. And again, there's a lack of paranoia and fear here. She's not motivating the audience with paranoia and fear. And that's very different than the dystopian conspiracy music at Trump rallies while he just talks about how terrible things are.
Thank you. So, Georgia, in the next 98 days, we have our work cut out for us. And this is not going to be easy. This is hard work, but we like hard work. Hard work is good work. So, Georgia, today I ask you, are you ready to get to work? Do we believe in freedom? Do we believe in opportunity? Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it? And when we fight, we win. God bless you. God bless the United States.
So listen, you don't have to like the policy. You don't have to like Kamala Harris, but she's not in the basement. She's not on the golf course. She's not using fear and paranoia to try to motivate voting. And this has totally upended what is happening in this campaign. Now, I want to give you a story of contrasts. That's Kamala Harris in Atlanta, speaking clearly and with gusto and with energy, and such a welcome change from what was being seen from Biden late in his campaign. We now go to J.D. Vance, where it is very, very different. You know, as I was preparing for today's show and watching videos of Kamala Harris in Atlanta and videos of J.D. Vance in Reno, Nevada, and remembering that J.D. Vance was supposed to be the coherent guy on the Trump campaign. J.D. Vance was supposed to be the guy that would energize young people and all different sorts of voters. And then I saw glitchy, totally uncharismatic J.D. Vance clapping for himself. At one point, you'll hear it sounds like a banana slapping against the desk, relegated to clapping for himself. It became abundantly clear that this was a disastrous choice for Donald Trump. Here's J.D. Vance glitching, and we're supposed to be saying, hey, he is a breath of coherent fresh air from Trump.
Do we want to defund the police? Do you want to ban fracking? So do we want a dangerous liberal like Kamala?
A dangerous liberal do you want? The entire speech was like this. He's terrible at this. He's absolutely terrible at it. He tried to use this. You know how, in general, elected officials and politicians, they have a generic stump speech where they repeat a lot of the same lines. And one of the reasons is you get really comfortable with those same lines and you deliver them perfectly every time with predictable results. He's been doing this when you fill up your tank at a gas station line, except he gets it wrong almost every single time, saying instead when you fill up your pump.
So when you fill up your tank at the gas station, maybe you should send a bill to Kamala Harris.
Wow. Just such a great line, and delivered so poignantly. Every single one of these planned stump speech lines going wrong. And we were told he would be really crystal clear in how he speaks. The continued, this is just so funny. Usha Vance, J.D. Vance's wife, seems to want nothing to do with this campaign. She looked like she was there under protest when they did a recent diner stop to get chocolate milk for their kids. J.D. Vance references he'll have to sleep on the couch if he tries to bring her up on the stage. He's the last guy who should be talking about couches right now.
Now, I would call her up here to come and speak, but then I think I'd have to sleep on the couch tonight, so I'll leave her alone.
There you go. And then at another point, the microphone just rebelling against J.D. Vance. Maybe the sound engineering was being run by Antifa, but J.D. Vance completely inaudible during parts of the speech. Which I'll be honest, the most coherent moments he had were when his microphone wasn't working. Listen to this.
Now, I have seen the consequences.
Oh, boy. He's still speaking, now tapping the mic. This is the best. Tapping, tapping, tapping. blowing into the mic, tapping, laughing, talking, waving the mic in the air. And then suddenly the mic is back. And then finally, in a Jeb Bush-like moment, amidst a not super enthusiastic crowd, someone had to clap, and it was J.D. Vance clapping for himself. Oh, man, this guy is completely pathetic. So things going swimmingly for J.D. Vance. We heard from Kamala Harris. And finally, let's go to the man himself, the man of the hour, or maybe the man of the minute, Donald Trump. Last night, part 2 of Donald Trump's Gong Show interview with Fox News propagandist Laura Ingraham aired. And when he was asked about Melania Trump's feelings about the assassination attempt that Trump survived, the answer tells us so much. You almost start to feel bad for the guy. You almost do. Listen to this.
What was Melania's reaction, if you don't mind my asking? I know this is very personal, when she learned about what happened on that field in Butler?
She was watching.
Oh, she was watching in real time?
She was watching live. It was all over the place. It was.
First of all, does anyone believe that Melania Trump watches Trump's rallies? Does anyone seriously believe that? They just renegotiated their relationship, the financial elements of their relationship, and she's nowhere on the campaign trail, seem to be under protest at the RNC. And we're supposed to believe she just sits at home watching these Castro-like multi-hour rallies. So it's already a lie. But now we get to the critical part.
On television, so on your network, but it was all over the place. And she was watching. I asked her that. I mean, I wasn't there. I was on the ground. And when the world started to, like, you could talk to people, I said, so what was your feeling? And she can't really even talk about it.
Traumatized.
Which is okay, because that means she likes me.
No, she
loves me.
That's good.
I mean, let's say she could talk about it freely. That wouldn't be, I'm not so sure which is better. But she either likes or loves me, and that's nice. But
yeah, it's breaking news. Melania Trump may like Trump. She really likes me. Or she might love him. But the real reason that Melania Trump doesn't talk to Trump about the assassination attempt is they don't talk. They don't talk to each other. By all reports, leading completely separate lives that you would think evangelical Christians would say, that's not the way you're supposed to live. We're not voting for the guy. Of course, that's a principle that they only care about sometime. And when it's inconvenient, they no longer care about that. We then get to Donald Trump talking about Kamala Harris. And Trump is 20 years older than Kamala Harris. And he starts alluding to, she's kind of old. Like, she's not really that young. She's older than I thought she was. If you're almost 80 and have a fraction of the energy as the woman you're running against, who's roughly 20 years your junior, I don't know that you want to call attention to age, but that's what Trump does.
Years old, a lot of people. I didn't realize she was 60. I thought she was a little younger, but she's 60. She is talking a big game, but her game is pretty bad. I mean, she was the border czar. She's trying to pretend that she wasn't. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah. So, he was surprised that he's running against the 60-year-old. He thought that Kamala Harris was younger. Laura Ingraham gives Trump the opportunity to sort of clean up J.D. Vance's mess about childless cat ladies and women with no children. And Trump doesn't really seem to clean it up.
Women out there watching who may not have kids.
I think they understand it. No, I think they understand it. The Democrats are good at spinning things differently from what they were. All he said is he does like, I mean, for him, he likes family. I think a lot of people like family, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And you know why? You don't meet the right person, or you don't meet any person. But you're just as good, in many cases, a lot better than a person that's in a family situation.
There you go. So clearly bringing back all of the women disgusted with what J.D. Vance said. And then lastly, Trump employing the I know you are, but what am I approach, saying, you know who's weird? Kamala Harris is weird. A week after the Harris campaign has been saying, this dude's weird. This movement's weird. Trump going, I've got nothing better than to just say she's the weird one.
I hit a nice 7-iron right next to the pin. Biden wouldn't do that. He couldn't hit the ball 15 yards.
I mean, what is this, just plain weird?
Listen,
American families?
The whole thing is a con job. Just plain weird. You know who's plain weird? She's plain weird. She's a weird person. Look at her past. Look at what she does. And look at what she used to say about herself, and I won't get into it, what she used to say and who she was compared to what she said starting at about 2016.
Is that making sense to anybody? But no, it's now Kamala Harris who's the weird one. So we finally get to the conclusion of this 2-night event, a Fox News propagandist Laura Ingram's interview with Donald Trump. And we learned that Trump can't really explain to us what Melania thinks about the assassination attempt because they don't speak. Trump can't really explain to us, based on part 1 from the previous night, what makes J.D. Vance a good VP running mate. He can't really explain why those women and anyone who knows a woman, quite frankly, disgusted by J.D. Vance's comment about childless women, why they should vote for Trump. He can't explain any of it. A softball interview meant to help him, which probably did more damage than it helped. Make sure you were subscribed to the YouTube channel. We're trying to do this thing, 2.5 million subscribers. Hit the subscribe button. It's free. It's a beautiful thing. I just saw that last month we had 4 million different viewers who watched clips but didn't subscribe. 4 million. If we can capture just a fraction of those, wow. So hit the subscribe button on YouTube. We'll take a very quick break and be right back with Tim Miller. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com, joinpakman.com. It's great to welcome back to the program today Tim Miller, host of the Bulwark podcast, never Trump Republican, former RNC spokesperson. I have a whole list of possible titles here, but we won't use all of them.
Those are good.
Tim, I've been listening to your podcast, and I want to talk to you directly about 2 things that are happening right now and the dynamics of this very interesting presidential race. Number 1, the early attack lines against Kamala Harris, and number 2, what seems to be the growing weird and strange attack line against Trump and J.D. Vance. Let's start with the former. The initial attacks against Kamala Harris included her laugh is like a cackle. She doesn't have biological children. She was the border czar or is the border czar, and she failed. This sort of thing. Do you think these attacks make sense, knowing the way that the Republican machine operates? Like, do you understand why these are the attacks they're choosing? And do you think that they're effective?
Yeah, well, I do understand why the attacks that the Republicans are choosing. Look, the Republican machine is very good. I used to be part of it. Is very good at identifying perceived weaknesses, identifying things that are maybe a little bit over the line that Democrats wouldn't want to engage in because that gets attention, that gets people talking about it. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it backfires. Sometimes you can go too far over the line. And I think that during the Trump era, there has been this weird conventional wisdom that has congealed that you can't go too far over the line because it worked for Trump, because Trump got elected. Everybody said and then he became president. And so they've used that rationale to justify doing stuff that like we wouldn't have done, back in my day in the Romney Republican days. And I think that these attacks on Kamala, I want to put the immigration one to the side, but the cackle, the attacks on her laugh, the DEI attacks, the attacks about childlessness, I think those are over the line. They're going to backfire. Even Fox News host Stuart Varney and Neil Cavuto were making this point yesterday on Fox. I know
I saw that.
Yeah, and I think that there's a group of people in the middle of this country that maybe have certain complaints about the Biden-Harris administration and were maybe open conceivably to a Trump ticket or open to just leaving the top of the ticket blank. But they live in a society. They have nieces or sisters, or maybe they themselves are childless. They like the fact that Black people and people of color are getting more opportunities in our society now, right? Like these are good, middle class, middle of the road people, and they don't like this kind of schoolyard bully, racist, sexist BS, and I think it's turning them off. And I think it's a big loser for them, the identity-based attacks. I think some of the policy ones might be more effective.
Okay, so now that you wanted to put the border czar thing aside, there's been somewhat of a focus on that. Trump retruthing some memes about it recently. The counter has been, she's just not the border czar. That's mostly the counter that I've seen. You consider that one to be in a different category?
I do, just because like she did that Lester Holt interview. There's a Trump ad out today that talks about the problems with the border, and there's a lot of lies in it. It like kind of blames Kamala for the fentanyl crisis, which is ridiculous. Fentanyl comes in mostly through points of entry, legal ports of entry. But just as a general, just speaking only as a political matter, right? This notion that whether or not she was technically the czar, like that was part of our portfolio dealing with root causes of immigration. There are concerns about that among people in the country, some of them legitimate, some of them overblown. And she gave that interview to Lester Holt, really before she kind of had her sea legs in the role of VP. She comes off a little dismissive of it. They use a quote where she talks about how she hasn't been to the border. She's like, I haven't been to Europe either. I don't know. I watched that ad and I could see how that might work with a certain demographic of gettable voters. And I think that in general, her biggest potential vulnerability is just for the less engaged voter, kind of the person that's not watching this YouTube feed, that is only getting politics news via osmosis. Just, is this a California liberal? Is this an open borders left-wing socialist, somebody that's anti-capitalism that I can't vote for? That's not true about Kamala Harris, but that is a dangerous perception for her political prospects that I think she has to aggressively push back against. And I think that is a much bigger potential vulnerability than the identity stuff.
If you were advising the Trump campaign right now, what would you see as the best attack lines?
That she might be trying to put on, a new moderate clothes, but underneath this is a far left California liberal that wants to, force you to sell your guns back to the government, that wants to completely decriminalize the border, that wants to, raise taxes on the middle class, raise taxes on small businesses, that doesn't want to do anything about inflation, that can't solve inflation because she's just a big tax and spend liberal. Like
the standard stuff.
Yeah, I think that a standard stuff, that she's a far left tax and spend liberal, more liberal than Joe Biden. I think that is what I would stick to, because the people that they're trying to get, you have to understand, there are people out there that are racist and sexist that won't vote for her because of that. They're already not voting for her, right?
Right.
And so that's why I don't think those attacks work, right? So the people that they need to get, that the Trump people need to get over the bump are, if you look at Georgia, for example, let's just use Georgia as a prime example. He lost by whatever it was, 20,000 votes, something like that last time.
Wasn't it 11,780 or something?
I was thinking of the Raffensperger call in my head. How many did he get? 11,000. It was 20,000 in another state. 11,000 votes, right? Those 11,000 votes, and you could cut it a bunch of different ways. Maybe it's turnout, but like there are a lot in the Georgia suburbs, in the Atlanta suburbs. There are a lot of traditional conservatives. They voted for Brian Kemp for governor. They voted for Raphael Warnock for senator because Herschel Walker was too crazy. They voted for Joe Biden for president because Donald Trump got too crazy. And Donald Trump is starting to try to win some of those folks back. And if you're the Harris campaign, you have to stop that. And if you're the Trump campaign, the way to win those folks back is not to be like, this is a childless cat lady. The way to win those folks back is to be like, this is the California liberal that you guys don't like and why you used to vote for Mitt Romney. And I think that kind of softer approach would be their best bet.
Now let's talk about the long, strange, weird, and creepy trip that it's been the last few days. The attacks on JD Vance as being weird, Trump is creepy, Pete Buttigieg, Tim Walz. I mean, they're all on message about it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Been pushing this for a while. It worked on Blake Masters in the midterms. I was on the Wilderness John Favreau, I think a year and a half ago, where I said that the Democrats should lean into this. It absolutely worked in Arizona. I have a pollster friend in Arizona who was shocked by the number of verbatims. Verbatims are when you do a poll, you're like, hey, do you want Mark Kelly or Blake Masters? Do you think things are going well or poorly? And then at the end, they say, why are you for Mark Kelly or why are you against Blake Masters? And he said it was insane how many people said he's weird, he's creepy, I don't trust him, and like it worked. That the Kelly versus there's Masters campaign, that line of attack worked. Those same people I was just talking about in the Atlanta suburbs, they are they're just regular businessmen with families. I say men because most of the women are already most of their wives are already voting for the Democrat. And they are not looking for some tech bro weirdo who wants to determine whether their daughter is allowed to take get medical treatment for ectopic pregnancy. They're not they do not want some guy that is obsessed with having genital checks at high school swimming meets,
right?
To make sure all of that stuff is weird and it's creepy. I think creepy is really the key word, because that is about somebody that wants to have control over other people. Weird might be like you have weird interests, like you're into knitting or whatever. You have weird interests, but like that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about,
is knitting that weird though?
I guess not. I guess maybe for maybe maybe in certain demos, knitting might be kind of weird. I guess you're right though. What would be
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Like being really into bats. I don't know. Like there are plenty of things, having a pet rat. I had a friend with a pet rat. That's kind of weird. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about creepy. We're talking about these guys that want to have control over other people, and they have these obsessions with gender and with when women are having babies and with whether women can, be in charge in boardrooms, and whether you drink your Bud Light, or, what the opening ceremonies at the Olympics were all about. Like, these guys are all just obsessed with weird stuff. They want to control you, and people don't like that. And I think that's an effective message.
Before we move on to a couple of polling things, since the failed assassination attempt on the failed former president, there were these moments where initially it was Trump struck by a bullet, or was it a piece of glass from the prompter, but the prompter was fine, so it was a bullet, at least according to Trump, but then we didn't get a medical report. Christopher Wray goes, we are actually still trying to determine it, but then now it was a bullet. We just don't know if it was like a shot from the bullet or a fragment of the bullet, or kind of a careening bullet that was going end over end after striking something else. Listen, I don't know what it was, although the injury seemed quite modest. Is your take that it's not really a great strategy to keep talking about what exactly and how Trump was struck? Like, it's just not useful for the left to really talk about it very much?
Totally. I think it's a loser. It makes people sound crazy themselves and a little conspiratorial. Like, the reality is a bullet went flying past his head.
Right.
Even in the conspiracy theory version of this, right, where it's a fragment, it's like, he was shot at. There was an attempted assassination. A bullet went past his head. He was bleeding out the ear, and then he had the wherewithal to kind of stand up in that moment and have that iconic picture. That was, in that moment, it played right into Trump's frame of this campaign. He was making this frame of this campaign that he's strong, Biden's weak, and that really played into his hands. And obviously, he got lucky. Thank God that the bullet wasn't a little bit closer to him, or else we'd be having a whole different conversation right now. So I just don't think that talking about that element of this is helpful at all for the left. Here's one thing I do think is worth talking about if that subject comes up: the fact that this was another troubled young man who had easy access to an assault weapon. And it's like, why was he able to get up there? It wasn't about the Secret Service. It wasn't about rhetoric on the David Pakman YouTube page. It was about the fact that he had easy access to a automatic to an assault weapon, and he had easy access. You could just walk into Home Depot and get 50 rounds of bullets and walk right out, despite the fact that he was underage, right? Like, he couldn't have bought a White Claw that day, but he could have bought 50 rounds of bullets. I think that is, again, going back to who this core audience is, these suburban swing voters. They don't want troubled 20-year-olds to be able to get ARs. And I think kind of reframing this conversation about that, rather than about, whether there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll, would be wise for the left.
Do you think if Trump does end up dead that day, Joe Biden is still in the race today?
No.
Really?
I don't think that Joe Biden... I got in a lot of trouble in my podcast from people that are big Biden fans. So, we're maybe into I'm trying to let bygones be bygones on this. Joe Biden couldn't campaign. Joe Biden was not capable of doing the basic things necessary to campaign. I'm not saying he couldn't still be the president, but he could not make compelling, coherent arguments. Even in his Oval Office address the other day, he's still talking over his words. People say it's a stutter. It wasn't. He does have a stutter, but he sounded very different than he did 4 years ago. Just watch the clips of him 8 years ago. I think, I don't know. I think we would have been a very scary time had Trump been assassinated. I have no idea who the Republicans would have nominated. Literally, you could have literally told me anybody besides Nikki Haley. It wouldn't have been Nikki Haley, but it would have been somebody MAGA. But that person would have had momentum in the polls and the kind of rationale for Biden staying in about the threat to democracy. Look, we're in a total counterfactual, but I think that the pressure would have continued to mount on him to step aside because of his inability to do the basic elements of a campaign, which require, a certain level of being able to communicate.
So June 26th, the day before the debate,
Yep.
Real Clear Politics polling average is Trump plus 1.5. Today, as we record this interview, it's Trump plus 1.7. In the intervening time, you saw maybe the worst debate performance, I guess, since Nixon from Joe Biden.
Way worse. But yeah, continue.
Yeah. You saw Trump survive an assassination attempt, have a week-long party celebrating him at the RNC, and finally finish the Veep Stakes reality show that lasted months or a year and select J.D. Vance. And all of this got him 0.2 percentage points in the national Real Clear Politics polling average. What's going on? Since isn't this supposed to be the peak after all of these successes and victories?
Yeah, he got no bump out of the convention, which I think is very noteworthy. He did get a modest bump out of, to call it a bump is maybe a little gauche, but his polling did improve for a little while after the failed assassination attempt. But that's come back down to earth after Biden dropped out of the race. And I think right now, what you're seeing in the polls is kind of this reversion to the mean. Trump's main advantage in the polls all year, really, was that there's certain parts of the Democratic coalition, traditional Democratic voters, that were unhappy with Joe Biden either because of inflation or age. It was or Gaza. It was younger voters. It was Black and Hispanic men mostly, and then a handful of other voters who had issues related to inflation or age, and they're traditionally Democrats. All of those folks, nearly all of them, are already home with the Democrats, with Kamala. And so that now we've reverted back to the mean, and we're back on the same ground of which type of voters to compete against that we were in 2020. It is working class white women, who are unhappy, who I didn't want the overturn of Roe. It is college educated men that have been traditionally Republicans but don't like Donald Trump. These swing voters. And then there's a turnout battle that's going to happen. So I think right now, essentially, after like the most insane month in a half century in politics,
Right.
We've really just reverted back to the mean. And I think that Kamala has room to grow. And if you look at these poll numbers, it usually takes about 2 weeks for stuff to sink in, and so I think that probably we'll see her poll numbers improve over the next few weeks as she chooses a VP and has a convention of her own. How much? I don't think she's going to be up 55-45. That's just not the country we're in. But I think that she'll improve at least modestly in the coming weeks.
So in a sense, it almost seems like, Trump got 46% of the vote in 2016. He got 46 point something in 2020. He's polling 47.
Yeah.
Is this just the peak of what Trump can garner as far as support in this country?
Yes, this is the other good news. I think that Trump is about a 40. Maybe I think he could get up to 47 because I do think he's improved a little bit with that group of working class men of color. Again, tiny bit. So if he has 46 point something, that you push up another 0.5 to 47%. I think that's probably realistic to see that. But 47% isn't enough to win unless RFK Jr. gets a big slice of the pie or some of these other third parties.
Well, hold on. He won with 46 in 2016.
Right. But why? Because Gary Johnson and Evan McMullin got huge percentages. I don't have in front of me, but got significant percentage of the vote, way more than the third party candidates did in 2020. So in 2024, what you didn't want was people that were unhappy with both candidates to have this off ramp, if you will. And RFK, he has like a handful of super fans, but then besides that, he was just gobbling up people that were like, I'm sick of these two old guys. I don't want them. I'm going to go for the also old but slightly less old guy instead.
Right.
Like, this is a protest, right? Now that Kamala is there, I think that protest vote number is going to go way, way down. And she is going to gobble up all the people that are traditionally Democrats that weren't happy with Biden. And then, she's got to fight to get her number up to 50, 49, 50, enough to win a close election. I think that's really doable. I think the map is very doable for her. It opens up more states having her on the top of the ticket, but it's going to be a dogfight. Like, I don't see a blowout coming, but I think that if you have Trump at 46 or 47 for Kamala, it's about kind of hoovering up as much of the rest of that group as possible and getting the RFK number as low as possible.
Last thing I want to ask you about relates to JD Vance.
Yep.
It seems to me JD Vance doesn't really get Trump any new votes. Tell me if my instinct is wrong. And then also there's rumors that Trump is displeased with the way the JD Vance experiment is going and that maybe there's a change coming. Is that even realistic to think about or no?
I wouldn't say it's a 0% chance. We're living in strange times, but I think it's pretty small. Those rumors, I can say on pretty good authority, is there is a group of people around Trump who are traditional foreign policy hawk Republicans that kind of hope that they can just put their own people in the and the Department of Defense and Secretary of State and kind of get most of what they would want. And they were very unhappy with the JD Vance pick because he's more of a nationalist isolationist in the mold of Trump.
Yes.
And so I think it's I think that what you're hearing is rumors and gossip mongering dribbling out of that world, right? Trying to undermine Vance. Will that work? Probably not, but I think that they're going to try to kneecap Vance, people in that traditional foreign policy hawk kind of wing of the Republican Party. And then as far as Vance is concerned, electorally, he does add nothing. I thought so at the time. I do think they tricked themselves. I think Don Jr. tricked his dad, at least, into believing that he helped with like upper Midwest, working class white males. And I just, there's no evidence of that in any of the, in any of the polling or in JD Vance's election performance, which was way worse than the Republican governor on the same ticket, Mike DeWine, who doesn't claim to have any ties to Appalachia or the white working class. So JD Vance is not, he has negative charisma, and his comments about women, I think Trump being weird, there's part of the reason why the weird thing is landing now, just to circle back to that, is Trump's weirdness has an appeal to certain people, not me, right? It's kind of like he's like a avuncular, charming, like New York. He's weird, but it's like in a way that makes you laugh. Some people, not me. JD Vance doesn't make anybody laugh.
No.
Like, his weirdness is just, you are creepy. You want women to stay in marriages even if they are being abused. You have deep thoughts about when women should bear their children. Like, it is creepy. It is unusual. The way you carry yourself is creepy. And I think that is like splashing up onto Trump in a way that's unhelpful for certain voters.
Not to mention, I don't know if you've seen video of the campaign stops with Usha Vance. She does not seem happy to be there. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but combining the expressions on her face and her prior comments about Trump, I struggle to believe she's done a 180 and is totally behind this thing.
Yeah. Well, you made your bed and you got to lie in it. You made your couch and you got to lie in it.
You got to lie. Exactly. Tim Miller, host of the Bulwark podcast. Always great to talk to you, Tim. Thanks.
David, thanks for having me on, brother. See you soon.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. There was a hearing yesterday during which we heard new details about the man who tried but failed to kill Donald Trump. We heard these details from FBI Deputy Director Paul Abate. And I have to tell you, it was not very shocking to hear that they figured out that the shooter was into some right-wing stuff. You know, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck and it smells like a duck and it reproduces like a duck, it's probably a duck. And when we heard that the Republican son of a Republican gun owner with Trump signs on his lawn shot at Trump, it sure seemed like this was a right-wing thing. And now we've learned, thanks to FBI testimony, that the Trump rally shooter had a social media account with anti-Semitic and anti-immigration themes and espoused political violence, all of it extreme in nature. Here's Paul Abate, the FBI deputy director, saying it himself.
Something just very recently uncovered that I want to share is a social media account which is believed to be associated with the shooter in about the 2019-2020 timeframe. There were over 700 comments posted from this account. Some of these comments, if ultimately attributable to the shooter, appear to reflect anti-Semitic and anti-immigration themes, to espouse political violence, and are described as extreme in nature. While the investigative team is still working to verify this account to determine if it did in fact belong to the shooter, we believe it important to share and note it today, particularly given the general absence of other information to date from social media and other sources of information that reflect on the shooter's potential motive and mindset.
Now, in hearing this, of course, a whole bunch of MAGA types have come out of the woodwork and they've said, see, we knew it. We knew that this information was going to come out later and they were going to try to pin this on the right when it was obviously a left-winger that shot Trump, or it was even some kind of setup or a staged thing, none of which there is any evidence for. And at some point, you just kind of have to say, I don't know, Republican shooting Trump, AR-15, Trump-loving dad, lawn signs. It's probably a right-winger who, for whatever reason, either wanted attention or became disaffected with Trump, or Trump wasn't right-wing enough, or who knows. But there's certainly nothing pointing to the left. Now, either way, I denounce it. Either way, I don't want candidates killed or shot. I want to win with votes rather than bullets. But at a certain point, you have to say, oh, it's the thing it looked like it was. Now, a little bonus insanity from this hearing. Here is Senator John Kennedy, Republican Senator John Kennedy, no relation to the Democratic Kennedy family, bringing up to FBI officials Peter Strzok and whatever the other woman's name was. I can't even remember. This relates to this was a storyline from 2018, and it doesn't need to be revived. It has nothing to do with what's going on right now, but it's all Kennedy has, so he brings it up.
In which the FBI agreed to give Peter Strzok $1.2 million and Ms. Lisa Page $800,000.
It's my understanding, Senator, that the Department of Justice was involved in that, not the FBI.
The FBI had nothing to do with it?
There may have been consultation with our general counsel's office, but...
Does the FBI have to sign off on it?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't believe so, but I would want to confirm that.
I would like you to, this would be the same Lisa Page who said...
Yeah. Anyway, this is the Strzok Page thing that Trump was obsessed with 6 years ago. It has nothing whatsoever to do with what's going on right now. And then finally, to cap it off, Josh Hawley's questioning of the acting Secret Service director, Ronald Rowe, turns into a shouting match, as conversations with Josh Hawley tend to do.
What more do you need to investigate to know exactly what the decision-making process was? What more do you need to investigate to know that there were critical enough failures that some individuals ought to be held accountable? I mean, what more do you need to know?
What I need to know is exactly what happened, and I need my investigators to do their job. And I cannot.
A lot of people didn't do their jobs.
I cannot put my thumb on the scale. Otherwise,
what do you mean put your thumb on the scale?
You're asking me, Senator, to completely make a rush to judgment about somebody failing. I acknowledge this was a failure of the Secret Service.
Is it not prima facie that somebody has failed? A former president was shot.
Sir, this could have been our Texas school book depository. I have lost sleep over that for the last 17 days,
then
just like you have.
Somebody to hold them accountable.
Senator,
This idiotic grandstanding from Republicans who suddenly find their anger, and they never do after a school shooting. They never do after a mass shooting. At that point, we don't want to politicize and let's not start pointing fingers. All of a sudden, Josh Hawley is angry. Really despicable stuff. We have a great bonus show for you today. We're going to dive into the Kamala is the border czar story that we talked about a little bit with Tim Miller today. The Project 2025 director has stepped down. Why? We will discuss it. And so much more When I'm joined on the bonus show by producer Pat, make sure you're signed up at joinpacman.com. Best way to support the work we do, and you get access to the bonus show, and we'll be back tomorrow with a new program as well. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. T-Mobile just had a data breach exposing the personal information of 37 million users. Verizon recently had a data breach affecting a ton of people. It doesn't seem like it's going to stop. And the way to protect your data is by using a VPN, which hides your IP address, essentially anonymizing your data and protecting you from these breaches. The only VPN I trust is Private Internet Access, which is the only VPN that has legally demonstrated they don't log your activity. You'll get 83% off. That's just $203 a month plus 4 extra months free at piavpn.com/DavidP.